Good morning. I'm SunAh, and you're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. Every Monday morning, I'm joined by experts from across the country who are investigating our most pressing social issues and common curiosities. Over the next hour, you'll learn about their inspirations, motivations, and of course, what they know about the world around us. So grab that cup of coffee and get ready for a fun and insightful conversation. Immigrant success stories are American success stories, and these stories often focus on first-generation assimilation, but what of the second generation? Children of immigrants often describe feeling pressure to fulfill their parents' dreams and displaying an embodied gratitude for the sacrifices their parents made. Success is most often framed through economic and educational achievement, and of course, the heteronormative lens of career, family, children. So there's a limited vision of success growing up in an immigrant family. So what happens when who you are and what you desire conflicts with what your immigrant parents want for you? That is the question at the center of Brown and Gay in LA, The Lives of Immigrant Sons, Dr. Anthony Christian Ocampo's latest book. Dr. Ocampo is a professor of sociology at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. He is an academic director of the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity and the co-host of the podcast Professoring. Dr. Ocampo has received fellowships from the Ford Foundation, Jack Jones Literary Arts, Tin House, and the Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation. His writing has appeared in GQ, Catapult, BuzzFeed, and the Chronicle of Higher Education, among others. Dr. Ocampo was recently featured in the Netflix documentary White Hot: The Rise and Fall of Abercrombie & Fitch, as he was one of the employees involved in suing the company for racial discriminatory hiring practice. He is also the author of The Latinos of Asia: How Filipino Americans Break the Rules of Race, and of course, most recently, Brown and Gay in LA, The Lives of Immigrant Sons, the book that we'll be discussing today. Good morning, Dr. Ocampo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. I'm so happy to be here doing this with you.
Yes. So I told you before we started recording, but I have to say on record, I absolutely love the book. I was already a big fan of your writing with the Latinos of Asia. I just loved how clear the writing was, how you really drew us into those stories. And here again in Brown and Gay in LA, it's the same thing. I mean, I just absolutely fell in love with the writing. And let me just go ahead and say too, I knew I was going to love the book already because I loved your first book, but in the preface of Brown and Gay in LA, in like the first few lines, you invoke your zodiac sign. And I was like, oh yes, I love this. So I just have to throw that out there. I was like, oh yeah. Yes. Come on, Virgo.
Yeah, I mean, how can you not, right? There's like Virgo with Beyonce and Britney and Jennifer Hudson. There's no shortage of amazing Virgos with whom I could associate myself. So why not put that in there? Plus, it's like, I mean, I know not a lot of people are into the zodiac, but you know, queer folks, it's like every other breath we talk about the signs. But yeah, it's just a fun way to talk about personality traits, and behold, mine kind of match up with the Virgo thing. So thanks for clocking that.
Of course. I was like, oh my goodness. I even wrote a little note in the margins. I was like, OMG, I love how he brings in his zodiac sign to really explain how you're reacting in this moment to this vignette that you share.
Yeah, but before we go to that, what is your sign?
I'm an Aquarius.
Okay, tell me give me the lowdown on the Aquarius.
We're very brainy and loners. And I don't know why this came to my mind. I was like, and we like to hold a grudge, probably because people are always telling me that I hold grudges.
Oh my, no, I'm not mad at that because my partner is an Aries, and he is he has a PhD in holding grudges, so I know what that's like.
Yes, I love it. Ooh, Aries. I don't know about the Aries and Virgo. Look, I have to look more into that. Aries and Aquarius is it can be volatile.
Oh wow, I bet,
that fire and air, right? So it can big flames.
Yeah, but to your point, I mean, I jokingly open with the Virgo thing because I'm trying to like contrast the dynamics. I'm sorry, the personality traits of myself and my partner. And yeah, so just for those that haven't picked up the book yet, I open with this vignette or this story about how the day after Donald Trump was elected in 2016, my partner, who was like the most chill dude ever, tells me like, hey, we need to have a contingency plan for if something happens to us. And I'm the one that's like the overthinker, the worrier, and I'm kind of surprised that he even like is thinking about something might happen to us because yeah, he's just much more relaxed and low key. But yeah, he actually like brought up a conversation about like if something violent happens to us because in this like post 16 the 2016 world, you just had so many examples of violence happening to minoritized populations left and right, most notably the Pulse shooting in Orlando in 2016. So it was a very precarious time. Not that any time in American history isn't precarious, but for that year, it really pulled the rug out from under us. And so like I thought, what more necessary time is there to really write the story of queer folks of color, particularly queer children of immigrants, at a time when we both anticipated that these populations that were going to be attacked left and right.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And we have seen that, right? And we continue to see that. And since you have started our conversation, with this vignette, right, that you start the book with as well, I was really moved in thinking about how nightclubs, especially for the respondents in your book, really operated as a safe space and a space to be seen in ways that they maybe didn't experience in their families. And very early, of course, in the book, you talk about how being gay was inherently incongruent with the hopes of immigrant parents. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. What were the hopes of immigrant, or what are the hopes of immigrant parents, and how was being gay being framed by your respondents' parents?
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, with that opening story, with the experience of living under the Trump presidency, with the experience of being a person of color and being gay, or even as a kid being questioning, it's a lot of stress, right? It's a lot of these moments where you feel like you can't relax because you feel like someone's going to come at you at any point in time. When it comes to um, being a child of immigrants, I think one of the common threads that I've noticed among children of immigrants that I know, regardless of what their family's background is that from a very young age, they're aware that their parents came here, they sacrificed a lot to be here. They may have gone through ups and downs to try to make a life for them, sacrifice, leaving, they left their families back home, they left everything they knew, they moved to a new country where they might not even speak the language. And so all of that is in the spirit of trying to create a better life for their kids.
Mhm.
I feel like even as a son of immigrants myself, my parents are from the Philippines. That was something that was very much instilled in me from a very young age. That like we came here so that you can have a better
Mhm.
education, a better life. We could all have a better life if we come to the United States, the land of milk and honey, as a lot of Filipinos like to say. And with that, I think that the dreams that immigrant parents share, this was shared by the people that I spoke to. This was something that I could relate to myself. We're very, very clear about what counts as an American success story.
Mhm.
I remember growing up that both my mom and dad would say things like, "Oh, we just hope you marry a nice girl and we hope that she's nice to us and treats us well and doesn't put us in a home once you get married. We're excited that for you to have grandchildren, etc." And of course, at some point in my life, maybe in like my young adult years, I was thinking, oh, maybe their plan for me is not actually going to come true because let's just say I had no intention or desire to partner with a woman.
Mhm.
And this was the early 2000s. And so the idea that I could partner, like actually have a partner that was a man was pretty much a far and distant dream.
Mhm.
And I think like when I think about the stories that I heard from other young men, it was that was something that I heard a lot, was that um, they thought that being gay would somehow ruin their parents' immigrant dreams. In the least bit, being gay or being known to be gay might ruin their reputation among their extended family, their relatives back in Mexico or the Philippines. It might also tarnish their reputation within the ethnic community. Those were the worries that these young men were having from very early on. I'm thinking like elementary school. They were worried about this stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. And let's just take a moment. Could you tell us about the folks that you talked to? Who were the men that you were talking to as far as race or ethnicity and age?
Oh, of course, yes. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, so for this book, as I'm a sociologist, and part of the sociology thing is that you can interviews not just with one person, but a whole lot of people, to try to see patterns in the experiences of the group that you're studying. So in this case, it was children of immigrants who are Filipino and Mexican American, as well as other Latino ethnicities. And I get the question a lot: why did you just focus on young men? Why didn't you interview women or non-binary folks or trans folks? And the reality is, when I started the research for this book, I did. Actually interviewed men, and I also tried interviewing daughters of immigrants. I interviewed trans folks as well. And what I started to realize real quick is that a identity as a cisgender male really, really shaped the type of conversations we were having. And so I
Mhm.
thought, one, just the reality is the type of conversations that we're having with other men is just there's a certain level of comfort that I think they had with me that I don't think necessarily happened right away with women or trans folks. And so I don't think that that's a poor reflection of me. I just think it's that you just can vibe with people of your same background in a way that others can't. The other
Mhm.
thing too is I thought, like, I'm gonna write a book. I feel some kind of way about writing a book, and then people would refer to me as like some authority on like queer women or trans folks. And I thought, on a political level, like, I'm not trying to do that. So yeah, long-winded answer to your question is that I interviewed about 60 folks, sons of immigrants who were young adults between the ages of 18 and 35. So these were young men that grew up in the 80s and 90s. And yeah, all of them were either born in the United States or they came to the US at a very, very young age. So their entire like childhood occurred here in the US. And yeah, it was mostly Filipinos and Mexican Americans.
Mhm. And you mentioned a little bit about what your respondents thought about as success, or the success that they imagined their parents, wanted them to have, and sometimes that their parents very specifically said to them, right, this is what we imagine for your future. Can you talk a little bit about how they learned that being gay was not part of that imagined future?
Oh, I mean, anyone that's born in this country knows that, like, being a gay person or a queer person, let's just say, folks aren't throwing parties. They're not throwing parties being like, oh my God, my kid is gay. It's just it's very much a stigmatized identity. Even though we have more representations of queer folks on TV and movies, it's still the case that in all parts of the country, even places that you would consider progressive, to be gay is just it's not okay in the eyes of a lot of people.
Mhm.
And let's just say that very early on, these young men learned real quick that anything that was gay or even considered to be associated with being gay, like acting effeminate, there's nothing inherently gay about a young man wanting to like play with dolls or watch My Little Pony, but that gets pegged as gay by virtue of the way we like associate gender and sexuality.
Mhm.
Anyway, how did they learn? They learned the hard way. They learned that when they did certain things, they were very violently or verbally punished for it. So there's all sorts of stories of young men that played with dolls and then they were yelled at by their moms or dads. they would be watching something on television and like a queer storyline would pop up, and then their dad would like yell at them or tell them to change the channel real quick. If they were too emotional, that was seen as acting like a girl, which is, that's considered kind of quote unquote gay behavior. So there was just moments from very, very early on in childhood in the context of the home where these young men got in trouble for not following the rules of masculinity. And that was very challenging, because you would think that the home, the family, is the place you're supposed to feel most safe. And for a lot of these young men, home actually felt very unsafe because of the way that they were constantly berated for not acting like quote unquote real boys.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, just the way that you describe some of the reactions of family members and some of the stories in these young men's lives, I found myself, I was very heartbroken for some of these men, in their childhood, right? Because as you said, the home we think about as the place that we can be vulnerable or that we can receive support. And for many of the respondents, it was not. In some very explicit and violent ways, as you mentioned. But one thing that you do talk about is how your respondents use different strategies to try to protect themselves, but also to be successful and to really, I like how you put it, control how they were viewed. And one way was through what you talk about, academic covering. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what that is and how some of your respondents use that strategy.
Yeah, so academic covering is this idea of investing in your academic identity, right? It wasn't that these young men, they were in middle school and high school, were trying to necessarily like hide the fact that people might or like pass a straight, for example. A lot of them didn't necessarily think to themselves, oh, okay, I'm gonna get a little girlfriend and then everyone will think I'm straight, right? A few people did that, but not a lot. So what felt more authentic and genuine for a lot of these young men was they thought, okay, I'm just gonna become really good at school. And the reason they did that was because it was functional, right? So for just imagine in the context of a public high school, some of these young men thought, okay, if I'm in the AP and honors classes, those are spaces where masculinity matters a little less, right? It's oftentimes, especially in schools with a lot of students of color, it was majority women in class. It was also a space where like all that mattered was how smart you were, not necessarily like how masculine you're presenting, or how many girls you were hooking up with. What mattered is that how good you were as a student, right? And so they could literally just like shave off the number of hours where their masculinity was going to be tested. The other thing too is that when it came to their families, some of them did the calculus in their heads and thought, okay, maybe if I'm like a good student and my parents find out I'm gay, then it'll be okay because like I'm good at school, right? At least they can focus on that. It'll distract them. Also, of course, like it's a easy way for them to be, if they ever get pressed by say like nosy gossipy aunties, right? Who are like, where's your girlfriend? They can be like, oh, I'm focusing on school. And what I guess was most painful to hear was that for a lot of these young men, as early as age 10 or 11, they were already thinking about school as their exit strategy. It
Yeah.
was their way out of a very like hostile homophobic environment that they were in their homes or their ethnic communities or their church communities. A lot of them were like mapping out their exit plan. Maybe they weren't doing it as consciously or explicitly, but when they thought about it retrospectively, they were like, oh shoot. I felt like back then I was doing well in school because I knew that school is a way to get into college, and if I go to college, I can move away, and I eventually, when I get a degree, I could get a good job. And if worst case scenario, if my family rejects me, at least I'll have financial independence one day. I have something to fall back on. So it was a very like multi-pronged strategy that these young men were engaging in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And you talk about how this strategy was used differently by your respondents. And we're going to get into that in just a minute, but let's take a quick break. You're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. This is Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm SunAh, and I'm here with Dr. Anthony Christian Ocampo, the author of Brown and Gay in LA, The Lives of Immigrant Sons. Now, before the break, you were talking about how many of your respondents engaged in academic covering in order to really control how they're being seen by friends and family. And you mentioned education as kind of a way to get out, and thinking about college as maybe a long-term strategy. But your respondents weren't able to use academic covering to the same degrees of success. So your Filipinos American respondents and your Mexican American or the Latino American respondents weren't as successful in using this strategy. Could you tell us a little bit about why that was the case?
It was different for Filipino kids and Latino kids, and I think a big part of that is because those two groups are treated very differently in school. There's a lot of research that shows how Filipino kids, and we could categorize them under the umbrella of Asian American. A lot of Asian American kids, regardless of their academic performance, are typecast as smart, as hardworking, model minorities, as from like quote unquote good families, as one of the young men I interviewed said. And a lot of Mexican Americans and other Latinos in the context of school are assumed to not be invested in school, are typecast as troublemakers, are typecast as folks that aren't necessarily aspiring to go to college. And again, that could be regardless of the actual academic performance of that individual. There were a number of Filipinos that I interviewed who said they weren't great students, but then teachers assumed they were, despite the fact that their grades were just all right. And then vice versa with Mexican American young men I interviewed that said they had perfect grades, they were involved in every club you could be in, but then they still encountered teachers at their school that assumed that they were just one of the other like literally like assumed them to be like gang members, which is horrible, right? So as you can imagine, the perceptions, the very different perceptions of Filipinos and Latinos in the context of school meant that with Filipinos, academic covering, that strategy is like right in front of them. It's very easily accessible. But with Mexican Americans and other Latinos, what I found was that they had to actually go above and beyond to prove themselves as good students. And that happened in a number of ways from one Mexican American kid talks about how he had to distance himself from other Latino kids so he wouldn't be seen as being like them. All of his friends were East Asian and Vietnamese kids in school. And that helped teachers see him as a good student because they just saw who he was associated with. Another young man talked about how he was a good student, a good Mexican American student in his school, but he was one of the few, right? This is the language that he used, like, oh, I'm one of the exceptions to the rule. And the fact that he even had to like say that it suggests that the way that the group to which he belongs is perceived in a very negative way. So it was really inspiring to hear these stories of young men, both Filipino and Mexican American and Latino, who would be, excellent students. They would strive for the best student they could be. They would get into these great college. What really pained me was that it was an uphill battle for a lot of the Latino kids. And number two, for both groups, it was this idea that like they're only worthy if they're able to prove themselves as good students. Like that's conditional love. That's not unconditional love, and that's not at all the type of beliefs that young kids, really vulnerable young kids, should develop in school, which is supposed to be a place that's supposed to feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really struck by that throughout the book about, as you just mentioned, these Filipino and Mexican American students really feeling that they had to earn that love, earn that validation, earn that acceptance and visibility here in the school context, but then also, in their families as well, that if they could just be that respectable student, or then later in their lives, that respectable gay man, that they could earn kind of the love and acceptance of their families. And it just really made me think about how a lot of marginalized folks, like that's how we think think we have to exist in the world of like, if we can just achieve enough, then we can somehow be accepted for who we are. But as you mentioned later on in the book, of course, we know assimilation already there. Through assimilation, we know that there is no acceptance, right? Even the word and the concept itself shows that you will never be accepted. You're always trying to be something that you'll never be part of.
I mean, that cuts deep. I mean, yes, we're talking about my buddy. I mean, I'm a 41-year-old man who has a decent job and decent number of accomplishments, and yet there are days when I'm like, quote unquote, unproductive, or I don't do much, and I beat myself up for it. And I think that it's a very it's a Kool-Aid that takes a long time to detox from. And so I think, as you point out, this isn't necessarily unique to just queer sons of immigrants, but any group that feels that they're in the minority, or they're stereotyped or typecast in a negative way, feel like they have to do extra work just to be in conversation, just to get their foot in the door. Sometimes we're a little bit off topic, but sometimes I wonder why, like, what is the equivalent white burden for this? And I think, like, maybe for white people it's that they have to go above and beyond to prove that they're not racist or something. But that's like nothing compared to what we got to go through everywhere in life. But yeah, it can get exhausting. I think one of the things that I did notice was that it just felt like these young men had no time to rest, or no time to let their just to let their hair down, quote unquote. Which is why things like what happened at Pulse are just so tragic, because that's one of the few places, like Latinx clubs or queer clubs for queer people of color, is like one of the few spaces where people can actually just relax and be themselves, not have to be the super student or the super son. And the idea that they could lose their lives in the space where they felt most safe is it's destroyed me. So
yeah, I mean, thinking about this idea of, when did these young men get a chance to really relax, to just be, or to even just explore, themselves? Of course, nightlife, and you talk about, different kind of pop-up parties as well as nightclubs, but also through, going to college as well. And, college is such a pivotal role for a lot of folks for different reasons, but for the young men that you spoke to, it held a different type of promise for them as well. And for many of your respondents, they made that intentional decision to go away, to really go away for college and to get away. Could you talk about some of the excitement, or some of the ways that college really did enable them to be able to be themselves?
yeah, I think like that is one arena where I felt like, oh, there's actually parallels between immigrant parents and their kids that were born here. To go to college, to go away for college, it's kind of like migration, right? You leave everything, you leave all the people that you grew up with, to go to a place in the hopes that you'll have a better life. There's no guarantees, but you hear or you think that maybe you'll have a better life. That's very parallel to what immigrants experience, minus the whole like international border thing. But yeah, I think that was really revealing when I would talk to these young men about their college experiences, because a lot of them, when they were in middle school, high school, they were like the only gay person in their school. And then all of a sudden they get to this huge campus where there's a number of other gay Latinos or gay Filipinos that are there to interact with and learn from. And when I say learn from, I mean learn everything, like not just like learn about identity, but also learn about sex, learn about health, learn about ways to change the world, all these sorts of things, learn how to come out to their families. Like, it's amazing how much these queer communities of color in college did the most heavy lifting with educating these young men about how to be better people, how to live their lives to the fullest, in ways that I think that should be the university's job. But here we have their peers being the ones that are the most pivotal people in their lives when it comes to coming of age and coming into their own when it comes to sexuality.
Yeah. I really enjoyed reading the chapter about education because you did get to see how some of these young men really came into their own, where they did really feel like I can be who I've always been and not have to hide or not have to feel maybe ashamed of it. And so I thought this chapter brought a little joy into the book, whereas some of those earlier educational experiences were quite heartbreaking.
I think that was one part of the book where I found myself when I was doing these interviews and people were talking about this period of college. I was a little jealous of all the things they're experiencing because, and I think this is one arena where my life very much diverged from the people that I interviewed because I wasn't out till after undergrad. And I went to school in the Bay Area. What a wasted opportunity. But yeah, so I didn't really do much when it came to my queerness, my queer explorations. And so it was really one of the things I really appreciate about doing research is that you learn so much from the people that you interview, and not just in terms of like, oh, what are their stories, but you learn about the possibilities for what life can be. It helps you reimagine what life can be. I was almost to the point where I was like nostalgic about college, even though it was their experiences that were pretty amazing. So it's I mean, in this book, as you know, in sociology, and my students always call this out, they're like, why is sociology so depressing? We always focus on unemployment and racism and all the terrible things. So for me, it was really clutch to be able to have the chance to talk about joyful moments that because I think like if you don't talk about those times, you're like missing a major part of what it means to be a human, what it means to be a person. I just feel like I'm not trying to do the trauma porn thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, another big space of joy and enjoyment for the young men you talked to, of course, was nightlife. And I love this focus on nightlife because it is such a big part of a lot of people's lives, right? Going out to the bars, to the clubs. And so you spend a lot of time talking about nightlife. And I just love this quote from the book where one of your respondents is talking about Latino nightclubs in particular as a space where queer men gravitate because we love men and we love our homelands. And that's one of the places our worlds converge. And
Mm-hmm.
I really got that sense from the voices of the young men that you included as they were reflecting on their time in nightlife and how for many of them it was uh, a transformational experience, especially for folks as they were visibly seeing different types of gay men, some for the first time, and really breaking the stereotypes in their own mind about what it meant to be a gay man.
For sure. When that quote you mentioned, it's from this amazing queer Latino writer, Rigoberto Gonzalez, and I didn't actually get the chance to interview him. It would have been amazing too, but he wrote those words for an article in BuzzFeed actually after the Pulse shooting happened because he wanted to just underscore how sacred these places were. A lot of folks might think, oh, it's just a bar, it's just a nightclub, but again, like these were spaces kind of like the college student organizations where there was a lot of learning happening, learning how to not just information when it came to like health or sex or relationships, but just learning about oneself, learning about what one could be when unconstrained by a heteronormative lens, and just having the freedom to experiment with different ways of being. It's interesting because I think like when it comes to assimilation, people maybe subconsciously think, oh, maybe gay people should assimilate and act more more masculine, or act like Will when in Will and Grace, like act more like Will than Jack. But what I really came away with in going to those spaces is that it was gay men who were effeminate that I thought were like, I experienced the most liberation, like the feeling of liberation most pronounced. It was most pronounced whenever I was around men who were feminine and would have no issue queening out. I just thought like what incredible freedom and courage to be able to exist in a way that is in complete contradiction of everything that you're taught to do in society. And in that sense, I think there was this moment in the book where I was thinking about the way that like effeminate gay men in particular get disparaged and negatively typecast
Mhm.
and called sissies and things like that. And I just thought, not even. They're the ones who are the most out, put themselves most at risk. And as we know in history, it's gender transgressing folks that have been the root of social change. When we think about people like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera over in the East Coast, there is no opportunity to assimilate for them, and so they have no choice but to be themselves. And in being themselves, it teaches other people, regardless of their gender expression, that they too can be themselves. I get, not to be corny, or I always get chills whenever I think about the years I spent in those spaces long before I was in the book, because I would go to gay clubs and bars at the same time that I was getting my PhD, and I think that for me, it was the perfect counterweight to all the things that happen in academia. You know, academia teaches you to conform and to play by the rules, and learn a certain type of language that you have to espouse in order to be successful. And going to queer spaces was the complete opposite. It was a space where actually there are no rules. You can be this one day and you can be that the other day, and whatever, who cares? And it was just so much. It was a place that I felt free. And I think had I not had that during my grad school years, I would have been a very different person today. But yeah, back to the people that I interviewed. I think like for a lot of them, they saw these spaces as outlets. Some of them even described it as akin to church, but they were special places.
Yes. And, for your respondents, I was really struck by well, I guess really, I shouldn't say struck by, but really happy and excited for them that they had these spaces where they could just be and where they could explore and where they felt, safe and supported, because they didn't have those spaces in the places where we think that people normally should, whether at school or at home. And so to hear your respondents talk about nightlife and the connections that they made, it was really exciting. Let's take another short break. You're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. You're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm SunAh, and I'm here with Dr. Anthony Christian Ocampo, the author of Brown and Gay in LA, The Lives of Immigrant Sons. Well, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the writing in the book. I kind of mentioned it when we first started talking this morning, but I absolutely love the writing style. Now, I think academic writing traditionally has been very boring and sometimes very difficult to read. And it seems like a lot of insider kind of jargon. But what I really appreciate about your writing, and in your previous book as well, of course, is again, how familiar it seems. This is a book that really draws you in, that wants you to be a part of the story and to understand the lives of immigrant sons. And so I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about the writing and some of the decisions that you made in the style of writing, the voice, including, some personal stories as well.
Thank you. I love talking about craft. I feel like we have a whole episode on craft. And if you ever want me to come back just to talk about that, I feel like I will talk your ear off about craft. So
Yes.
it's the writing. So I think I I feel like sometimes I get credit for pushing the boundaries when it comes to writing in the way I do. But to be honest, yes, I do give myself some credit. But to be honest, I think that the journey into becoming a creative nonfiction writer, which is how I identify nowadays, was very much shaped by my professional trajectory. So when I was in grad school, I learned how to write an article. I wrote articles too, and I learned how what was considered an article that was impactful to the field and was making a contribution to the field, et cetera, et cetera. And I was very much going that route. I was at UCLA, and then when I graduated, I was a little bit of a fork in the road. I had the choice to either do like this UC postdoc, which would funnel you into a research university, or I had a tenure job offer at the school I'm at, Cal Poly Pomona for short. And it's a regional state university. It's more of a teaching institution. In fact, your tenure is based more on your teaching than your research. And so it's this was the recession, right? And so I was like, I can't risk going to postdoc if I got a job,
Right.
not only a real job, and it's in my hometown, and it's 20 minutes from home. So as much as I was indoctrinated to only the one thing, I made the decision to go to the teaching university. And I think that matters a lot, because when I started teaching there, I realized that the students I had at the Cal State University system were vastly different than the ones at UCLA. So at UCLA, there were overwhelmingly 18, 21 or 22. They were the ones that were the best students in their respective high schools. And, they were very much like, college was very much the center of their life. Of course, that's not everybody, but it's very different at the Cal State system, where my students were almost overwhelmingly working some 40 hours a week. Some also had caregiving responsibilities. I have a lot of students that were parents. I had a lot of students that, had to take the bus. They live near campus. They had to take the bus to campus. I had a lot of students that were dealing with a lot of life stuff. I can't even tell you, like, everything from housing insecurity to food insecurity to their parents being deported. Like, these are the type of stories that were common at the Cal State that I would rarely or never hear at the UC. And this is all to say, what that meant was that in my classes, when I would assign readings, I knew that my students were pressed for time. And so I noticed that students responded differently to different writing styles. So for example, when I assigned students Punish by Victor Rios or C.J. Pascal's wonderful book on masculinity in high school, the students were like, no matter how busy they would read, they were into it, they would engage the text. And then when I gave them a book that would be respected in sociology, but had a different writing style, even though I could read it and liked it, it was really interesting to see students be like, I don't want to do the reading. This is boring. Like, I'm just not into it. And I'm not saying that students should read stuff that they don't like reading. It's an important skill, because, life or whatever. But I just thought, I want to write a book that's more like Victor's and CJ's. And so I wrote that book in a way that was very narrative driven. I told my editor, like, I'm not in an R1. So they were excited, because they were like, oh, that means you can like write it in a way that's more for popular audiences. I was like, I would love that. I would love to write a book that ends up at the airport. When you go to the airport, you go to the bookstore in Hudson.
Yes.
Like, that's like my dream. And so they really encouraged me to write in a way that was, I'll never forget this from my editor, Jenny Gavache at Stanford University Press. She said, you got to write in a way that gets people to turn the page, right? Yeah. If your writing is not such that people want to turn the page, then you're dead in the water. And I just really took that to heart. And to Jenny's credit, I would send her stuff and she'd be like, I'm sorry, Anthony, this is boring. And I actually would share drafts with my undergrads, and I would tell them, let me know the parts that you think are boring and the parts that you think you like. And so they really shaped me as a writer. I would not be the writer I am today had I gone to, say, like an R1 school. I can guarantee that. And then a lot of my, I had a lot of academic colleagues, a lot of whom I respect, that were like, are you sure you want to do that? Your book kind of sounds very like, it almost sounds like it's too personal, and They basically were saying it's not rigorous because of the way I wrote it, which is like so cliche. Um, but lo and behold, the book came out. My first came out in 2016, and it was getting read by senior citizens and high school students and folks in my neighborhood, and I was getting invited to talk about it on like local TV and in the Philippines, and I just thought, like, how cool is that? Yes, maybe University of Chicago Department of Sociology hates it, but who cares, right? People in my neighborhood, people in my home country are all about it, and that's really all that matters. Like, I sometimes like to be petty and look at my Google Scholar sites and see that my book is cited just like not a lot, maybe like 100 something times. But you know what? My book's been talked about in the New York Times and the LA Times and NPRs thrice. So whatevs, right? So anyway, I'm kind of digressing. I think you kind of see I'm a very like revenge driven petty person.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I'll be the first to tell you that I'm very much driven by revenge. And so and you know what? My book has sold like 10,000 copies. So whatever, like with like no major publicity arm. So kudos to me. But with the second book, more real talk, like I think when I was writing the book, in the middle of the writing, the Pulse shooting happened. And I just thought, like, I cannot write this book in a way that is, this book has to be it has to be written with some sense of urgency, right? It can't just be a book about this group of people. It has to feel urgent. So I felt like the urgency that I felt in the aftermath of the Pulse shooting really forced me to reckon with the writing style that I had. And yeah, that was part of it. But going back to the original point, again, because I'm a petty person, and that's fine. I was at another fork in the road where I had this moment where I had this moment where I was like, I could stay at my current school, but I'm being recruited for a job at a really great R1 institution that I had always wanted to work for.
Mhm.
And I at that moment I was like, oh, if I get this job at the R1, I'm gonna have to sort of like pull back on the writing style and make it more academic. And yeah, for that recruitment experience, it was horrible. They made me do 2 job talks, 2 sets of interviews in 2 different departments. And I had I know this is gonna air, whatever, I'm over this. I had heard that like a lot of people were in support, like numerically, a lot of people were in support, but there was just like one dude that just decided, nope, he's not gonna come here. And so I mean, that really screwed me up in a really, really heavy way. And so like I felt like I not only felt like I was less inclined to be in academia, I was like, I want to close the door, like screw these people. I know I shouldn't base it on like one white dude, but that's the way I felt. And the university works in wonderful ways. I was the same, that when that really, really terrible thing happened to me after that recruitment experience, which we should get drinks and we could talk about it. I want to give you all the names and details about exactly what happened. So anyone that's out there and you run into me in person, just buy me a drink and I'll tell you all the dirt. I'll tell you all the dirt. But yeah, I felt really lucky because that was the same year that on a whim I applied for a creative writing workshop. And I got in. Like literally within a week or so of having that other academic heartbreak, I got into this creative writing workshop, and I got to study creative writing with Kiese Lehman, who wrote this. I mean, if you don't know him, you're missing out. It's like one of the greatest American writers right now, and he's incredible. And when I worked with Kiese, I got to connect with other incredible writers who gave me opportunities to do more creative type of writing. I got into other workshops with that Jack Jones Literary Arts. I got to be I could spend a week in Savannah, Georgia, with writers like Imani Perry, Mary Toulousan. It was just so incredible. Lauren Jackson was there. She's doing great things in the New Yorker. And I felt home in ways that I never felt in sociology.
Mhm.
And, I've been lucky ever since I got into these other creative writing classes. So I got to work with Shakira Diaz and Nadia Owusu. I know the sociologists might be like, who are these people? Well, you know what? You're missing out. So I just got to be with writers that could render the experiences of people of color in ways that wasn't just about their trauma. It was in very full ways. It was in humorous ways. It was in petty ways, whatever. And I just thought, if my job is to render the human experience accurately, particularly for groups that have been dehumanized historically and in the contemporary moment, then I am better off learning from creative writers than I am learning from sociologists.
Mm-hmm. Well, that really comes through in this book. We get the full humanity. Yes, there is some tragedy, but there's a lot of joy and enjoyment and just regular everydayness in these stories. So again, thank you for writing this absolutely beautiful book. I'm excited for everyone to read it. It is a book to be savored. That's really what came to mind. So when you talk about, a previous editor talking about writing so that people want to turn the page, I wanted to turn the page, but I also wanted to really sit with each page. It's not a book that you just, skim through really quickly or you rush through, but it is one that you actually, enjoy, and you're with the young men in the stories. And so I absolutely love it.
Thank you so much. I am glad, again, if you ever want to have a follow-up and sequel talking about just writing, I feel like I just scratched the surface. I would love to talk to you about that again one day.
Yes.
But thanks for having me. This is amazing. Honestly, this is the best convos I've ever had so far about the book. And I feel like I have you to thank for that.
Well, thank you so much. We will definitely have you on again to talk about writing. Thank you, Anthony. Brown and Gay in LA, The Lives of Immigrant Sons.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Thank you again to Dr. Anthony Christian Ocampo. The book is Brown and Gay in LA, The Lives of Immigrant Sons. Of course, as you can imagine, there is so much more in the book that we did not get a chance to talk about this morning. So if you're interested in learning more about the book, definitely grab a coffee. Grab a coffee, but also grab a copy of the book. As I said, it's really a book to be savored and enjoyed. Absolutely loved reading it. For today's positive note, I want to leave you with this quote that says, "If I wait for someone else to validate my existence, it will mean that I'm shortchanging myself." This quote really spoke to me, especially in context of the conversation we are having today, because so much of the book is also about really writing the stories of queer, brown men into what we understand as knowledge, into what we understand as the human experience. And Anthony has done it just so beautifully. Well, this has been Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm here every Monday morning, and you can always catch a replay of the show or get back into the archives, some other great conversations in podcast format. You can find the show Let's Grab Coffee, WYXR, wherever you stream podcasts. I can't wait to have you here with me again next Monday morning.